Hello and welcome back to Character Rigging for Beginners. This is part 2 where we'll be going over weight painting and skinning in this tutorial. And in an effort to kind of streamline this so that I know the first tutorial was really long and I'm sorry for that. I covered a lot of stuff and went really in depth on that. And this one, what I'm going to attempt to do is really not go so in depth on the tools, but if you need to know more about the tools, you're curious more about them, I will have other tutorials that'll be like part 2.1, which just talks about a specific tool. So with the exception of that being the paint weights tool, which we will be using extensively in this section. So so if you do need more of that information, don't fret. I will still have those, but they'll be separated out into different videos. And if you need those, you should be able to access them pretty easily to give you a little more information on the tools and their settings. But in this, I will just show you the settings that you'll need to use the tools that we'll be using, and then I'll refer to those other videos if you want to find out more. Okay, so you should have set up all of your joints at this point for our Tesla model. So here it is. I turned the Tesla model off just to show my joints. These are all nicely oriented down the bone. I have all my fingers laid out, and I have all them oriented to work with how the flesh and the hand has been modeled so that it has really natural rotation orders. So you can see how it is. Each of the fingers kind of rotates slightly different from another. Okay. All right, so I'll turn her back on here and we'll get started. Okay, first thing we're going to do is we have all of our joints set up, so we're pretty much ready to go. Oh, however, there is one thing that I failed to mention in the last tutorial, as surprising as that may be for how long that tutorial was. But one of the things we did, we set up multiple joints here, all at the same pivot point for the eye. So we have this left upper eyelid skin joint, and we have our eye right here, and we have our lower eyelid. These are all in the same pivot point, and just for the sake of this, we're going to keep going with that. That's okay. However, the real proper thing to do here that I failed to remember is that some of the tools that you use when you're painting weights and you're skinning your character and you're making these changes, some of the things they look at are positions for your joints. And where we have 3 joints on one position, it can be a little problematic using some of those tools that are looking at that and trying to transfer it over according to the same position that that joint is at. And you have 3 joints here. So the workaround for that is, instead of just having this upper eyelid, is you would create a joint or 3 joints that were, I'll make this smaller, that were for each part of your eyelid here. So you would do this joint, duplicate it, we'll just snap it over to about here, duplicate it again, and snap it over to here. And then what you would do is we would name these the left upper inner eyelid, and the left upper middle eyelid, and the left upper outer eyelid. And then these we would take and we would parent them to that upper eyelid bone. Parent. And then what that does is, when it comes time to creating controls, we're still using this joint for our controls, there would be no skinning influence on that left upper eyelid skin. But because we're centered there, those rotations and all the skinning weight would be on these three joints, and it would pull that eyelid down with that same circumference that we're looking for. So that is more the proper way to kind of set that up, because there are tools that do depend upon the joint position. But for this, I mean, it's okay. We can work around that and not really have many issues there. So I'm just going to leave it as is. Everything else is set up and ready to go. So first thing we're going to do is we need to bind our mesh to our skeleton. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to select, and you can select this in any order for this tool. So we can select our skin and then our root joint. And then we'll come up here under the rigging tab here underneath skin. There's the bind skin. Okay? And these are the settings that we're going to use for the bind skin. So we're going to come over to our option box here, and we're going to bind to just the joint hierarchy, and the bind method closest distance is fine. The skinning method, actually the bind method we want to use is this geodesic voxel here. Gives slightly better results than what you can get before, and it's fairly new. Skinning method, we're just going to use classic linear because it works with basically everything. Normalize weights 1 at interactive, weight distribution at distance, allow multiple bind poses, that's fine. Max influence, we're going to leave that at 5, and we should be good. And then, so kind of the default is okay. So if you want to know more about the bind skin options and the tools there, check out part 2.1, which will go over the bind skin tool in more depth. But these are the settings that you want, and you're just going to hit apply or bind skin. Either one is fine. The difference between these being the apply applies this without closing your option box, and the bind skin applies it and closes your option box. So, and it's like that with all the tools. Okay, all right, so we have bound the skin here, and it is now attached to our joints. So you'll notice that it has colorized our skeleton. That was one of those options in there. And this is totally fine. It's really just for visualization purposes. It serves no other function, just to give you as a user more feedback. So, okay. So if we were to go in and we grab one of these joints, we're now bound. Okay. So now whenever we come in and we start moving joints around once our skin mesh is bound, we want to make sure that we're only doing it on our rotation value. Okay, and the reason why is because when we set up our joints, we made sure that we were always freezing these transformations, making sure that our rotations were always at this 0, 0, 0. Okay, if you have a joint that is not set at 0, 0, 0 and you come across that, you're going to want to unbind your skin. So you would select your mesh, go to skin, and unbind your skin, and fix that. Okay, freeze the transforms, and zero these out. You want these at 0 because we're going to be checking back and forth on these rotations on the different joints to see how it's deforming. And we want to do that just using our rotation. Okay, and the reason why, because yeah, again, these are all at 0. It's real easy to remember 0. And it's real hard to remember, hey, my translate x is at 0.659. My translate z is at negative 0.023. So if you move it to see what's happening with your deformation, look, all those numbers have changed. Okay? And I've already forgotten what my translate x was. So we can hit Control Z and go back. Sure, but a lot of times you're going to move stuff you're going to mess with the weighting, and then you're going to want to move it back. Okay, so we want to avoid that. Undoing it won't help. You can always select your skeleton and go to skin and click go to bind pose, and that will snap all of those joints back to where they were set when they were bound. Okay, you'll notice here in the outputs here that there's a bind pose 6 that was created. Okay, so and yours may say bind pose 1, and that's fine. We don't want to rely too much on that bind pose because in the rigging process, it's real easy to break that and to and no longer have access to it. And then when we go and we try to do that, go back to bind pose, it won't work. So we want to stay away from moving our joints at all costs. Okay, so our character is set up. Obviously, the skinning and the weighting is not ideal, right? We're moving our shoulder here, and it is collapsing in our chest as we're moving it. And because the character is, pretty well spread out, a lot of these weights aren't going to be terrible out the gate, but they're not going to be perfect, that's for sure. And we're going to have to make these edits and these changes. Okay, so the one thing that we have here in this model is we have all these end joints with our joints that we created, and these end joints were really just created to orient the tips, right? They actually don't need to have any influence at all on our model. And right now, if we were to move that around, you can see we have influence on it. So it's not a big deal. That's why there's that option for just selected joints when you bind a mesh. But it can be tedious to sit there and select all the joints there. So there's a really small script that you can run that can select everything. And if you've named everything like I have with an underscore capital E end here, then I can post up that little script and you can run that. And what it'll do is if you select your root, it'll select everything in the chain and go through and say, oh, if it has this underscore end on it, don't select it. And then when it's done, it'll print a little message that says, hey, all the joints have been selected for skinning. And then you could just shift select your mesh and go to skin, smooth bind, and these wouldn't have the influence. But if we want to get rid of those influences, we can just shift select all of those end joints that we don't need influence on. Like this, don't need any there, don't need any on our toes, tip of our toes, and then we shift select our mesh. And you go up to, again, under rigging, under skin, and go down to edit influences, and hey, remove influence. You click that, and now, let's see if we go back to that same joint, and I move it around. Hey, there's no influence. What do you know? It's just exactly what the tool said. So, and if you miss a joint, you need to add joints after the fact. There's an add influence on there as well. So to find out more about those tools, you can go ahead and check out video 2.2, which will talk about adding and removing influence in a little more detail. Okay. So now that we have our model bound and we have removed those influences, Okay, there's a couple things that we can do to kind of get started with cleaning up how all of these verts are influenced by each of these joints. Okay, and some of the simplest things, we want to work from really broad range to very general, or very specific, I mean. So general to specific, and just knock out some of these larger things. So if we go just quickly to our front view and select our model here and go to hit F9 to get to our verts. And I'm just going to quickly select right here half of my character, and then underneath the tool settings, I just want to get rid of that soft selection. So I don't need that. All right, and what we're going to use is we're going to start using, it's a real boring tool. It's called the component editor. I have a button for it right here, which is my component editor, but you can get to it underneath Windows, General Editors, and Component Editor, which is right here. So if you click that, it's going to open up this. Okay, bunch of numbers. It's going to give you all this information here. We're going to go off of the polygons and we're going to look at our smooth skins. Okay, this is a smooth skin bind that we have used, meaning that one vert can be influenced by multiple joints. If you do a rigid bind, then you can only have one vert can only be influenced by one joint. It's either on or it's off, nothing in between. So it makes it very stiff, very rigid. But yeah, we're using smooth skins here. We did a smooth bind, okay, and our component editor here shows us all of our verts, and it shows us all of the joints that we have influencing all of these verts. Okay, so if you want to find out more about the component editor, I will give more details in the character rigging for beginners part 2.3, and I will talk about that in a little more depth. For now, what we're going to do is we're going to find, I've selected everything on the left side, which means generally I don't want anything from my right side affecting my left side. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to find, this is all alphabetical, and I'm going to find anything that's on the right side. So right here, right clavicle, right elbow, right eye, right eyelid, all these things that I don't want affecting that left side. Okay, so I'm going to go through, I'm going to select everything that is on the right. And go all the way down, and you have to kind of click and kind of slide this around, or you can click and hit your page down button to keep going down. It's real tedious. It's not the most graceful of tools, but it is a very handy tool. Okay, so we want to turn off any influence on that. We're going to hit 0, and those columns should have disappeared unless I missed something. Oh, there we go. I'm going to hide the 0 columns. That would be good. Okay, and then I have my right shoulder affecting it still, and my right ponytail. And so I'm going to highlight all of those. Go all the way down to the bottom here. A lot of verts here, so lot that we have to eliminate. Okay, and hit 0. And that should get rid of all of that influence there. Okay, perfect. So I'm not worrying about the right side because there is another great tool called the mirror skin weights. So with our body selected, we're just going to show you what these options are for the mirror skin weights. So our model is being mirrored over the x-axis, or the YZ axis, I should say. So going from a positive x to a negative x. If your character is turned a different way, then it's going to be on a different plane, right? And that is what these options all give you. So the XY plane means you're going from positive Z to negative Z, or mirroring across the Z axis. And your XZ one will mirror across your Y, so going from top to bottom. So, but we're using the YZ, and we're doing everything on the left side, which is our positive side, going over to negative. So we're going to make sure that we have this positive to negative checked. If we did do stuff over on the right side and we wanted to mirror over to the left, then we just uncheck that, and it would mirror it over. Okay, then we're just going to use closest point on surface, raycast, influence, association as closest joint, and we'll click on normalize to make sure our points are normalized. Okay, and we'll click here. So now that will have mirrored everything, all the changes that we have made on that, and we'll come back here to our perspective view. Okay, so we've done that, and we've cleaned up the two sides, and now we can kind of do it by parts, right? And really knowing, like, hey, you know, I can select, going back to component mode, F9, I can start selecting all of these points. And again, open up my component editor. And these points, I know at this point, I really don't want any influence coming from my root, from my lower back, from my mid back, even from my pelvis. Right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for those and make sure that I'm getting rid of them. Left ankle, fine. Ball, fine. Hip, fine. Knee, fine. Lower back, not fine. Root, not fine. Pelvis, not fine. We're going to zero all these out. Just like that. Okay. Now, one thing that I didn't mention here, but is important to know, is we're using a weight normalization of interactive on our skin weights here. That was one of the options that we selected underneath the bind skin. And what that means is it is keeping our weight values totals to 1. So 0 means that this left ankle skin joint here has 0 influence on this vertex, 5120. Okay, so it has 0 influence. It mostly has influence on the left knee skin, with a tiny bit on the hip, and it all totals at 1. This is what we want. We want it all to total up to 1. So when we're taking away weight from one place, it's distributing it over the other places so that it totals at 1. Or if we're adding weight on something, then it's going to take it from other places, but keeping the total at 1. Okay, there are other normalization methods like post that allow you to just keep adding weight. And so what that would mean is this total would not be 1. It would just keep going up and up and up and up. And this can get really confusing and really mess up your weights as you think you're painting weight onto a joint, so it has 100% influence on it, and you find out, oh, it's not normalizing my weights, this total is wrong, so I'm still getting influence in this other area. So that's the general basics of it, and we'll touch more on that as we go and as we start into the actual weight painting tool. Okay, so I'll minimize the component editor again and keep going. Okay, so again, I'm going from general to specific. So another thing that I can do is in this area, maybe to here. So this whole midsection here. I know that I'm not going to have any influence. I shouldn't have any influence from my shoulder, elbow, forearm, twist joint, wrist, fingers. Nothing from the head or the neck should be affecting it, and nothing from either of the legs. The clavicle may have some, so I'm not going to worry too much about that. But at this point, I shouldn't get any influence from the left hip, the left shoulder, and so I'm going to zero these out. I don't want that. I don't want any on my neck on any of these verts. We'll zero those out. And I'm not going to worry about the right side because I can mirror it. Okay. And let's see, root, pelvis, mid back, low back. Okay, yeah, that seems fine. And now I can just go back to object selection mode here, and I have a button here that is the mirror weights button. But again, if you don't have that button, it's just underneath skin and mirror skin weights. 2018, slightly different icon for it. Actually, it might be the same, but before 2017, the icon is different. So one of those is different. So sorry, at work I work in older versions for different projects that were created in those and have tools that are no longer available. All right, so I've mirrored that, and now I can keep going. Okay, I can go back to component mode, F9, and select links from here. And you can grow your selection by hitting Shift, and your period key will grow it like that, and your Shift and comma key, so those two little bracket keys, greater than, less than, will grow your selection or shrink your selection according to what you have. So I'll grow it because I want to get the rest of that boot, and then I'm just going to hit Control to not select these ones. Okay, and basically I'm selecting these because at this point I shouldn't have any influence from my left hip. All right, so we'll bring up my component editor again, and I shouldn't have anything on this left hip here, so I'm going to zero this out all the way down. Okay, so, and then we do the same thing for our ankle, right? And we would say at this point on our ankle, we shouldn't have any influence from, and even back here, should be no influence from the knee. at this point. So bring up our nothing past the ankle or the ball should have influence on these, and I'll zero those out. Okay, so this is just cleaning things up really quickly in areas that you're 100% sure should not have any influence on anything else. Okay, so we can set these influences really, really fast, really, really quickly this way, eliminate stuff that could be giving us problems and issues that we wouldn't want. So, and we can do the same thing with our arms, right? And we select basically from our shoulder on over and bring up our component editor, and we'll say, oh yeah, we don't want anything from the, maybe some of the left clavicles coming in there, and we're going to get all of our finger joints in there, which are fine. They should influence, but we got this ponytail. We don't need our ponytail influencing any of these verts at all. So we're going to quickly zero those out, and now have this left eye and eyelids. I don't want those. They should be having no influence. Zero that out. And let's see if there's anything else. Mid-back shouldn't have anything. The neck shouldn't have anything. And we're getting into the right side. We don't have to worry about anything there. Zero that out. Coming over, upper back shouldn't have anything, so we'll zero that out. Okay, this is okay, and believe it or not, this does help speed things up. Okay, so then we would go down the line. I'm not going to go through all this for you, but at this point, I hope you have a really good idea that's like, okay, I've done this for my shoulder. From this point on, the shoulder shouldn't be affecting any verts for sure, 100%. Maybe there's some that come to here, and that's fine. But we'll eliminate anything from the shoulder that's being affected there. We'll come to our hand and our wrist, and we'll say, hey, from this point, nothing from the elbow or the forearm should be affecting these. We can go down the line with the fingers, and we can start selecting fingers and saying, hey, this is my pointer finger. Nothing from my middle finger should affect my pointer finger. And this is good to just grab a point at the end and do that grow selection trick, which is just, again, your shift and your, I can't ever remember if it's a greater than or less than sign, but it's the period key. So, and you grow that selection out to a place like that, and then you would say, hey, I don't want any influence from anything from my left middle finger, anything from my thumb, and you could do that for each of those fingers and say, hey, and nothing from my wrist should be on here, and it just starts cleaning that up. So that is working from the broad or general large areas down to our small areas. And we're going to do that with everything, right? We want to move down the line away from stuff, just cleaning things up as we go. Okay. All right. So once you've kind of done that, in F8, we can mirror those weights again. Okay. And we've gone through that. Okay. Now it's time to really get into the weight painting. So weight painting is tedious, okay? It's annoying. A lot of people really don't like it, and I don't blame you. It's not my most favorite thing either, but it's essential. Good skinning will fix so many problems, and bad skinning will make your rig look terrible. You could have super fancy controls, awesome options on your rig, have everything set up so well, and if your weights aren't done well and your rotation points for your joints aren't set up right and not in a good position, it's just gonna look so bad. It's gonna make it feel like just a terrible rig. So, you know, typically when I'm making a rig from scratch, I mean, a third of the time that I'm spending on a rig is just painting weights and just getting that going. And so, you know, it can be very, very tedious. Okay, so all right, let's start painting weights. Oh, the other thing here is if it's a separate model, then it needs to be bound separately. So our eyes are separate models. So, and we need them to be controlled by our left eye. So we'll select that, shift select. And shift select our eye there. This is the button for the smooth bind. I can't remember if it comes default on the rigging tab or not. But if not, it's just under skin, bind skin, and in this case, we'll say just use the selected joint. It's just one joint. It doesn't even matter how many influences. We wouldn't, since it's all going on one joint, we could put it on a rigid bind, but yeah, no need to worry. Oh, it's saying it's our, oh, I didn't disconnect it before, so it's actually already set up. Ooh, but look at that. Ugh, I don't want that. Do not want that. Okay, so this is again where like going like real general and going in and selecting verts on the head and growing that selection. Okay, and pretty much everything. I mean, well, probably even easier. See, I'm thinking too small here. Is just selecting, going back to object mode, selecting that left eye and the one. There we go, and the right eye skin, and shift selecting these and just going up to our skin, edit influences and remove influence. Okay, we don't want any of that. Okay. All right, and if you find like I did, oh, hey, I should have added these other joints here, and you want to add them after the fact, you can certainly do that. That's where that add influence comes in. But if you're unfamiliar with how to do that, I really, really recommend watching that other tutorial, 2.2, on adding or removing influences, because there's some stuff that could really frustrate you in the whole process. Okay. All right. So now that joint will only have influence on our eyeball. Yay. Same with the other one. Okay. And then we could do the same thing here and say, hey, none of these verts should be affected by the head. They should all be controlled by the ponytail joint chain. Yeah, but so there's, you know, again, working that methodology with our component editor will help clean things up a lot. Okay, so now we're ready for the real fun part, the Paint Weights tool. This is the icon for it up here on your rigging tab. It looks like a paintbrush with a bunch of dots on a grid. This can be found underneath skin and paint skin weights tool here. So if you just click that with your model selected, it's going to show up here. Okay, and when you hover over it, you get a little cursor there. And what we're going to do is we're going to open up our tool options. So this guy, this little hammer here, if we select that, it's going to bring up our paint skin weights tool. Okay, so this one I'm going to go over a little more in depth because it does have it deals with a lot of stuff that we're going to be doing in this tutorial. I mean, this is the bulk of what we're going to be using. Okay, so what it's going to give you here is going to give you a list of all of your joints. Okay, and there's a little lock button here, which will lock your weights. And then you can select each of these, and what it will do is as you select those, it shows you the influence that it has, okay, in a painting color here. So if I come over to my model, I have a really small brush. So if I want to make that bigger, I just press and hold my B key, B for brush, and while holding that down, I just click and scrub back and forth, and that will make my brush bigger. Okay, so you have to do this per joint, right? So if we go and we look at our root joint, it's going to highlight these as it goes. It highlights in blue. Unfortunately, it highlights all of its children as well. So when I go to the lower back, now everything from, or when I go to low back, everything below the root is no longer highlighted, right? So that just gives us an indication of what bone we're working on. And we're going to be going back and forth about a million bajillion times, okay, all the way down the line where you can see these here. Okay. All right. So the things to really know about this is, one, we're going to be working in this mode, this paint mode right here. Okay. This is what's going to be painting our influence. We are looking at a color ramp right now. In old versions of Maya, it just looked like this. Okay. Black and white. And that's fine. Some people prefer to keep that way, and you certainly can. There's nothing wrong with that. White over here represents 100% influence on that selected joint, and black represents 0 influence. Now that this joint is not affecting these at all, period. Okay. I prefer using, they give you a couple options here. I usually check on the use color ramp, and I like this black, red, yellow, white option. There's a multicolored one, so giving you 5 different colors that happen here. So pure yellow being your 50% influence, this being your 25% influence, this being closer to like 5%, you know, and going the other way. So it gives you a bigger range of knowing like, oh, okay, yeah, this has very little influence on it. It's really just what you're used to, what you prefer. There's nothing wrong with it. I mean, I just like this one. It's simple. It works. Red is real easy to see, a lot easier to see on a black canvas here than shades of gray. Okay, so that's all that is. Okay, so you have a select geometry button, which will select your geometry. Okay, and then you have these paint operations. The ones we're really going to be using a lot: add and replace and smooth. Okay, the biggest ones being add and replace. Okay, the reason we'll use these the most, and even though we're going to use smooth a ton, when you're on add or replace and you hit your shift key, come down here. So right now it gives me an A at my brush saying that I'm in an add mode. And if I hit my shift, it says SM, so I'm into smooth. Okay, and it will smooth out and make a smooth transition between these gradients. Okay, And then if we go to replace, so generally with the add tool, sorry, I'm taking a step back here. Generally with the add, we were going to be adding a value. We're going to keep our opacity at 100%. Again, it gives us normalized weight options. We want to keep it at interactive, and the weight type is skin weight. Okay. Yeah, we won't worry about the DQ blend or anything like that. Okay. And keep the opacity, but the value that you paint, this is one that will shift. Okay, typically we're making small changes, right, that are adding up to bigger ones. So whenever I'm in the add tool, I typically keep it about 0.15-ish, and really never go past like 0.2. Okay, but yeah, generally 0.15, 0.13, 0.12. This is all really, really good. Okay, so, and I can go in and say, okay, I am working on my root. That's one highlighted there. And if I just start clicking on it, I just start painting weight onto it. So now that means that these verts are getting more and more influence on our root. Okay. But if you don't want that influence and you're saying, oh yeah, no, this should not affect this at all. You don't want to go into your component editor, that's fine. This is when we use replace. Okay, so we switch over to replace. It's going to replace whatever value is there with this value, 0.153. So if we take that value to 0, then it's going to push that weight away. Okay, and what all that's happening is if you're adding influence, it's pulling it from the other places, from the other joints that have influence, and when we're replacing and we're getting rid of that, it's pushing it back onto them. And Maya just does it mathematically according to the influence that is already there. So if this point here has 0.5 on between this joint, and then 0.2 and 0.1 down to the root and our hips, and we were start painting that 0, it would just say, oh, hey, you're going to get 50% of what I'm painting away is going to go to you, 30% is going to go here, the rest is going to go onto this existing one. So that's kind of what's happening. So, and again, if you're in replace and you hit shift, it's going to go to your smooth tool. So you can hit replace and then hit shift and hold shift and do smooth, and you'll smooth it, and you'll smooth it down. So, okay, so that's pretty much the tool here. You have a flood option, which will flood the whole model, right? So be careful when you do that. The time to really do that is when you're like, hey, I'm up here on my left shoulder, and all of this right here should be 100%. There shouldn't be really any influence, and it's not white, so I know it's not 100%. So I can go in and click add and change my value back up a little bit and just start painting that on so that I get that add. Just like that. Okay. I get that, and I can do that all the way around. That can be sometimes annoying. So if you switch from your paint mode to a paint select mode, you're going to start painting verts. Okay. And so, for instance, we can come over and say, hey, I want to paint these verts, and you'll see you're just selecting them, right? Right, so we painted this selection now, and we can say, hey, this is my elbow joint right here. I'm going to go back to my paint mode, and I've still got those verts selected. And I'm on my add, and I'm at this value of 0.1165. Now if I click flood, it's just going to flood it to those verts. And I can keep doing it. It's going to keep adding that value until it reaches the maximum of 1. Okay, this now has 100. This is now being 100% controlled by the elbow. Okay. So, and again, we want to work from a root on up. Okay. So the tricky thing with her is she's got this body armor here. So really knowing the best way to do that can be kind of tricky. But we want to keep it consistent. So I could use my smooth tool. If I hit the smooth, come around here, shift and smooth it. Okay. There we go. Okay. Smooth that all around. Okay, and then we're just going to go down and add weight. Okay, so at this point you're thinking, what is it really doing? You know, you're not getting any real feedback. Okay, because your model is basing all of these vert influences off of your bind pose, and she's still in her bind pose. And so we could paint weight over to another part of her body, and let me go back here and get it out of the component mode. We could paint weight on another part of her body like this, and it remains exactly the same, right? So we're not going to see these changes until we start moving our character around. Okay, so this is where we start looking at rotations, and we go in and we can go in and start bending her. And now we can see what is happening. Now, once it's bent like this, and we're on her lower back here, you can see, man, it's giving us a real ugly bend here. Okay, just, it's not great. So we're going to go in, and with that joint still bent, again, I use rotation, because I know 0 will get me back to my default. I'll select my model, I'll go back to my paint weights tool, and I'm on my lower back. And now that I'm on my add and I have a 0.15 on there, now if I start adding influence, like this, we can see now it's moving. Now it feels like we're sculpting, right? And this is more the artistic side of things. And again, we'll paint weight and then we'll hit shift and we'll kind of smooth it back so that it's a smoother transition. And we'll come over here and we may say, I don't like that it's influencing this. So I'm going to go back to my root and I'm going to paint more influence in this area back on the root. And you can see how it's pushing these verts back to its position according to where the rotation and position of the joint that we're painting the weight to. So this one hasn't moved at all, which means these verts, when we put more weight on something, is going to push it back towards the bind pose, towards where this is rotated. So if we were to paint more on here, or paint this 100%, it's going to put these verts all the way back to where this joint, our root joint, is positioned, which is, there was no rotation. It didn't move at all. So this is basically back to the bind pose position. So I'll undo that. Don't really need that. Okay, so, but we will go in and we'll say, hey, I don't want this influence. You can come in and you can start zooming in and painting more weight, and you may get in here and be like, oh, now my brush is too big. Again, we hold down B and just click and slide, and now we can get a more finite painting option, right? So, and then we'll add this weight on, just like this. All right. And I'll hit my shift key, maybe make my brush a little bigger, and hit shift and start smoothing that. And so you really go back and forth a lot between smoothing and adding and painting weights, avoiding things like this. This is a multiple joints here, so I need to paint that weight either more onto the lower back so it is hiding it, just like that. There we go. And we're getting that. And again, I'm not worrying too much about this other side, right? Because once I come back into E, or hit E to get to my rotate tool, sorry, that probably made no sense. Go to my channel box and set that rotation X back to 0. And then mirror that again. So then if I go on and I go back to my paint weights tool, we can start seeing how it's mirroring. And we can smooth in between, mirror some more, and really start getting some nice deformation. So a couple other tricks and things to know about. So your clavicle and your shoulder and upper back share a lot of stuff. And so you're going to be painting back and forth and moving things around a lot to really see what's happening, right? So we know if we move this down, the shoulder down, this area is really being controlled more. So all around the shoulder is more controlled by our clavicle. The top part here of the shoulder is going to be painted more on the clavicle. So if we come here, we got the chest collapsing in. We don't want that. So we'll select that. We'll go to our paint weight, and we're going to go back to our tool settings, and we're going to go to that left shoulder, and I'm going to go to replace and zero that out, and just zero these out, right? I don't want her body collapsing in like that, right? So, and even though I have red on here, it can be sometimes hard to tell what is getting influenced, and sometimes you'll have these like 0.05 or 0.001 influence that's happening on these random verts. So there's a couple ways to get rid of those. If you're moving your model around, like have this vert kind of poking out. If you go into component mode, you can select joints. And if you select one that has kind of a crazy offshoot, it's pulling way out in a random place. A lot of times when your model is, it has large feet, so the feet get really close to each other, or like we were showing before, there were a lot of verts on our shoulder that were affected by the hair. We got rid of. Well, sometimes you'll miss some of those, so you can select those points that are shooting way off, and then you just hit shift and grow your selection just once or twice. Okay, and then there's a tool called a hammer weights tool. Underneath skin, you just select those few verts and you click hammer weights, and you can see it's trying to nail those down, and it's looking at all these verts around the vert that you originally selected and said, oh, okay, these are the normal ones. And this is the normal influence, but I got some crazy influence happening from somewhere else that's only on like these other these couple verts. So it's using these other verts as kind of a sampling size, right? And saying, oh, okay, these are like the normal, and this is obviously way off. So if you find that, the hammer weights tool is really, really good. The other thing that you can do is prune small weights. So in that, you'll just select. Again, you would select all the verts that you want to affect, and you would go up to skin, and then there's a prune small weights, and you would want to, the first time you'd want to go into your option box here. Okay, and it's really just one option. prune below 0.01. And that's kind of my threshold that I've set for myself. You may find times where you're like, hey, I don't want anything with higher value. So you just have to kind of set it and decide. So what this does is, because we have 5 joints that can influence a vert, there may be cases where there's an outlying, excuse me, there's an outlying joint that is affecting it really small, minuscule amount, and you're just not seeing it. But when you're moving it and you're moving the joint, you're noticing just a tiny little wiggle, and it will just drive you crazy. So the prune below in this prune weights option is just basically saying, hey, anything that has an influence of that's under 0.01, I want you to knock it to 0. Just, it shouldn't have any. So you can hit apply, and you'll see some of that move down. So I had influence from other joints that was really small, really minuscule. 0.01 is not much. Obviously, if you did a lot higher, 0.5, that's 50%. I'd be real careful about using that, because a lot of these verts, they are going to be close to 50% between the elbow and the shoulder. Okay, so simple little tool. Yeah, typically I keep it at like 0.01 or 0.02, 0.05 maybe. But there are places where you do want a little bit of influence, and it's tricky because the paint weights. It's a human body. Everything overlaps, right? Our skin is not segmented to just be affected by our shoulder, right? Our skin wraps from over our whole body. So as we're moving, there is influence that does happen, across a large span. And so you just have to move it and kind of see what looks good. Okay, so those are a couple tools to kind of help with some of the crazy things that may be happening and help you clean them up really quickly. So, but the big thing will be moving this around, getting that. So yeah, obviously the shoulder needs more work. There is just a lot of work here to be done. So, and it will take a long time. I'm not going to go through it all. I just want to give you a lot of good tips and tricks and pointers that will help you out. Another good pointer here is, if you've got something like this body armor and you're just trying to paint weight on the shoulder and that geometry underneath it, again, if you just grow your selection like this and say, okay, I need to paint weight here, okay, and I just want to see that. You can select all this, and in your viewport, there's this isolate selection button. It's this arrow with a dashed square. And if you click on that, boom, it just shows you this, okay? And then you can get in there and you can go on your paint weights tool, make sure you're really paying attention to what you're painting weight on, and you can start painting weight underneath that body armor, right? Because it's really hard to get to that. You could go inside the model and do it from the back, but that gets really, really hard and tricky. So using this isolate select button is really nice. You can grab a bunch of verts, hit that button, and then you can go back into your object mode and paint weights here. So we can go in and say, yeah, look, now I'm in here. I can say, yeah, I don't want any influence from the shoulder in this area, right? And this was really hard to get to before because she had that body armor that affected her. So we'll do that, paint that down, and hit shift and maybe smooth it out a little. Do one a little bit there. right? And when it's deformed, when you've got some rotation on those joints, it's really easy to start seeing what influence it's having. But again, paint away, hit shift, smooth it out. You can smooth out a little bit and have more influence. And then when you're done with that and you like it, you want to get back to the rest, you just click that button again, that isolate select, and it all comes back. Right? Same is true if you just want to be painting on her body armor, then you can select those verts and do the same thing. Okay. So I'll go back and zero out the rotation here. Okay. So and this is all well and great, you know, going in and moving it, but it can be real annoying to go in and say, okay, now bend this joint and bend it back and let me see what it looks like. So another little trick that you can do is you can set keyframes on your rotations, right? So you can go in, select a joint, hit S to set a keyframe, go to frame 10 or 15 or 20, it doesn't matter, and rotate that over, okay? And hit S again, or if you turn on your auto key here, it will do it for you. Oh, I've got some crazy settings here for blocking animation. Change this back to auto, and auto, save that, and then we can hit S and S, and hopefully I'll just delete this. Okay, get that. Okay, so now I can hit S, go a few frames, S. Okay, so, and now it's animating. It's not a great animation, but it's just showing me what what's happening, how it's deforming, the deformation. And then I can go in and I can select this, and I can be painting weights. All right, select my model, and then paint weights. There we go. And I can be painting weights, and I can squeeze it together using that animation while I'm still in my tool and not have to go back and forth and do that. So, yeah. So you can go down the line and create this animation. It's typically referred to as a range of motion animation. Some places, some studios will set up a range of motion animation for the whole spine, and it takes up 1,000 frames or something, and they'll just work down with that, and that is totally fine. So I'm going to do something like that. But yeah, I'll typically do things like this a lot, so I can get that rotation and see how it's deforming, and paint my weights as I go with that. And then when I'm done, and I'm happy with that, you know, I just select that joint again, select those keys, and get rid of them. Just cut them. Okay. So another great little trick, which is awesome. So this area you'll be back and forth painting weights on that to get your clavicle and your shoulder and your upper back looking good and deforming well. So that place is really tricky. The other place that is going to be really tricky is your jaw. Let's select my jaw here. I pull this down. But here's one of those instances where I have a vert that's flying out. So it's attached to that, and I can select those and just click that weight hammer. This is a button for it. So, but again, it's under skin, hammer skin weight, and it just pulled that back. So it eliminated that off of there. So, okay. So yeah, this is, you know, not looking too great. So yeah, I'll go in and I would select my head on my paint weights tool. and I would get that painted, go back to my tools here, okay, and you can come down to your head, okay, and then I can come in, go make sure I'm back on my add some value here, and maybe make my brush a little bit smaller. Then I can start adding in that influence, and I can start separating my upper lip from the bottom lip. And then smooth is a good way to start adding influence to verts that are really close to other verts that you don't want to influence. Like, I don't want to paint any weight on this bottom lip. That should be on the jaw. So, but if I hit smooth and I click and I drag that, so I'm holding shift and clicking down, because I have so much weight already added in this area, it's trying to smooth it and calculate it between this and the verts around it, and so it just starts pulling it up, which makes it a lot easier to start painting more weights on without affecting the bottom one. So going in, smoothing, adding more, smoothing, and mouths are tricky because you've got to do the inside of the mouth as well and get that looking good as well. I'm just working that. So these areas are really tricky. The eyelids are going to be really tricky. You've got to get that blink looking really good as it rolls down. And these are just the places that just take time. And that's really all this comes down to. So when you're painting weights, it is a lot more artistic than going through the component editor, because you do start shaping it and you really start to define it and everything. And it's going to be a tedious process and a long process. She'll take you, just with what we have, a solid 8 hours of just painting weights. So, and it doesn't sound exciting because it's not, but it's just the facts. It's just what you do to get through it. So yeah, those are, I'm trying to think of any other tricks that there are, but I think that covers a lot of it. So again, you're going to be working from your root, you're going to be working up your spine and down your legs, and you're going to get each of those looking good when they deform and when they move. So, and let me go back to that jaw and set that back to 0. Right? And then I can select this model and mirror it. Okay? Now, the mirroring does really work off of a symmetrical model the best, and you can tell with our Tesla model here that her hair is very asymmetrical. So the verts aren't going to be 100% left or right. So this area is not going to transfer all that well. So again, this is another reason why we work from general, where things are symmetrical, to specific, where things are not symmetrical, right? Because when we're mirroring these weights, if we went in and we painted all this and we got it all working well, and it's asymmetrical, then when we started mirroring those weights, it would just be messing them up, right, as we mirrored them. And then we'd get it looking good, and it's like, all right, that's perfect. And then you'd come down here and you'd work somewhere else and get those painted, and then you'd mirror those weights over, and you'd paint to your little heart's content and get more and more work done, and then go back up to the head and realize that the mirroring has totally screwed up everything you've done here. So get your general, your big, broad stuff done first and looking good, and then go down to the specific. Okay? And if you're unsure of, like, hey, I don't know where to put the weight on this, but I know I don't want it here, but I need to paint it away specifically away from it, so it doesn't have influence. In those cases, it's best to default to its root. Okay, so whatever its parent of that joint is. So if there's a lot of joints in the head that are influencing stuff, and you could be like, I'm not sure if I should be painting these verts over here, if I should paint them over to the lower eyelid, so that I get the upper eyelid looking right, but it messes it up now when I rotate the lower lid. Go to the parent, and the parent is the head, and start painting weights on the head. Okay, and it will give you the best results that way. So it's a good default, good rule of thumb that you'll work through on this. So yeah, I think that is about it. When you're all done, it will look like this. So here I've got this one pretty well painted. There might be a few spots. The nice thing about weight painting is that you can continually adjust it, right? So this is like my shoulder shrug, clavicle work, and then my shoulder, which comes down without collapsing, and my elbow is looking nice. Right, and my jaw. Is opening the mouth really nice, real natural. Okay, so, and you'll go through, and yeah, you just want to make it look as nice as possible. And yeah, you're going to be using a lot of those. You're going to be going back and forth on the Paint Weights tool, and getting that going, and then bending your joints around, making sure that they're there, that they're in good positions. One thing to note that I failed to mention here, another tool, is you have, so if you're sitting here and you're like, man, I thought that was a great position for this joint, but I just don't like where it's rotating from. It doesn't feel right. I want to move it. And obviously, if we try to move it at this point, it's going to move all the mesh, right? And you may have already done a ton of weight painting, that you don't want to mess up. Well, there is a great little tool under your skin menu that, if you come down, it's a move skin weights, skin joints, okay? And it allows you to reposition a joint without affecting its skin, right? So I could say, oh, I just needed it out just a little bit, and I wanted it just a little bit higher, right? You do that, and then just hit another key to exit out, or hit enter. Q is a good one to exit out, and you're back to that. And now you've got a different pivot point than it was before, and it hasn't deformed the mesh. Okay. So yeah. Okay. I will make those other videos that explain some of those other tools a little more in depth, a little more what's going on with them, but that should be everything you need to kind of start getting your weights painted and getting them to look good and everything. So, and just to give you what I'm looking for and what it looks like. When it's all weighted and looking good. This is what mine looks like. So if I go to my tools here, I can run down and you can kind of see the influence that I'm having. So this is my root, lower back, mid back, upper back, and my left clavicle, left shoulder, left elbow, left wrist, or forearm, forearm twist, left wrist, and then all my fingers. All right, here's the neck, here's the head. And you can see how much influence the head has kind of all over the place. The jaw, left eye has nothing, and then if you zoom in, you can see what those have. All right, lower lid, upper lid, and then if you select one of those, you can see you get a blink. Yay! Okay, that is it for this. Good luck with the rest of your skinning, and yeah, in the next one we'll start setting up controls. So good luck, and we'll see you at the next one.